Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The ink on the divorce papers was still wet, glistening like a fresh wound under the harsh chandelier light, when the heavy mahogany doors of the penthouse burst open, slamming against the walls with the force of a gunshot. Julian didn't flinch. He sat in the center of the expansive, cold living room, a solitary figure amidst the monochromatic gray and black decor that defined his husband's existence. 3 years. It had been 3 years of living in this gilded cage, married to the most powerful alpha in the city, yet treated like a ghost haunting the hallways. Julian, a rare omega from the impoverished Vane family, had been sold to clear a debt, expecting a life of servitude or perhaps cruelty. Instead, he received silence. Absolute, crushing silence. But tonight, the silence was over. Tonight, he was leaving, even if it meant triggering the wrath of the predator who had just walked through the door. Cassius Thorne stood at the threshold, his chest heaving beneath a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Julian's entire childhood home. Rainwater dripped from his raven-black hair, trailing down the sharp, aristocratic planes of his face, making him look less like a CEO and more like a mythic beast rising from the deep. His pheromones, usually tightly suppressed, flooded the room instantly. It was the scent of ozone, crushed pine, and something metallic, like blood on steel. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. What is this? Cassius's voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated in Julian's very bones. He didn't look at the suitcases by the door. His obsidian eyes were fixed on the papers on the coffee table. "It's freedom, Cassius," Julian said, his voice steady despite the trembling of his hands hidden in his lap. He stood up, smoothing the front of his cream-colored sweater. "I'm done being a decorative vase in your mausoleum. I'm done being the husband you refuse to acknowledge, let alone touch." Cassius moved. It was a blur of motion, unnatural speed that only a prime alpha possessed. In a heartbeat, he was across the room, looming over Julian, casting a long, jagged shadow over the Omega. He snatched the papers up, his grip crinkling the pristine sheets. "You don't get to leave," Cassius snarled, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees. "You are a thorn. You belong to this house. I belong to no one," Julian shouted back, the years of neglect boiling over into a sudden, furious courage. "You haven't looked at me in 3 years. You sleep in the guest wing. You eat alone. You treat me as if I carry a plague. If I disgust you so much, why keep me?" Cassius froze. The fury in his eyes flickered, replaced by something unreadable, something that looked dangerously like pain. He stepped closer, crowding Julian against the velvet sofa. The sheer size of the man was overwhelming. He radiated power, a gravitational pull that made Julian's knees weak. "Disgust," Cassius whispered, the word rough, as if it hurt his throat. He leaned down, his face inches from Julian's neck, inhaling deeply. "You think I stay away because I am disgusted? Then why?" Julian demanded, tears pricking his eyes. "Why have you never touched me?" Cassius's hand raised, hovering near Julian's cheek, trembling slightly before he pulled it back into a fist. "Because, Julian, look at you. You are porcelain. You are light. And I." He gestured to the dark, oppressive room, to himself. "I am destruction. My lineage. The thorn blood is cursed with aggression. One slip, one moment of lost control, and I would break you." Julian stared at him, stunned. The narrative he had built in his head for 3 years, that he was unwanted, unloved, unworthy, shattered. You think you'd hurt me? I know I would," Cassius rasped, turning away, running a hand through his wet hair. "My father broke my mother. His father broke his. It is what we do. When the doctors told me your omega physiology was fragile, that your stress levels were critically high, I made a vow. I would give you a life of luxury, pay your family's debts, and keep you safe. Even if that meant keeping you safe from me." "The doctors?" Julian frowned. "I've never been frail in my life. I used to work 14-hour shifts at the docks before my father sold me." Cassius spun around, his eyes narrowing. "Dr. Eris filed the report the week before the wedding. He said your pheromone receptors were hypersensitive, that an alpha's full presence could induce a stroke." A chill went down Julian's spine, unrelated to the air conditioning. "Dr. Eris. He's on your uncle's payroll. Cassius, your uncle has been trying to invalidate your claim to the CEO position for years. If you don't produce an heir within 5 years of marriage, the board reverts control to the secondary branch. To him, the realization hit Cassius like a physical blow. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and suffocating, as the pieces of a 3-year-old conspiracy fell into place. He had been starving himself, denying his instincts, living in torture to protect Julian based on a lie designed to strip him of his legacy. But before Cassius could speak, a sudden, piercing shattered the tension. The glass balcony doors behind them exploded inward. Shards of safety glass rained down like diamonds as 3 figures rappelled into the room from the stormy night. They were clad in tactical gear, faces obscured by masks. Mercenaries. Secure the Omega, the leader shouted, his voice distorted. Julian didn't have time to scream. One of the assailants lunged for him, but he never made contact. A guttural roar, inhuman and primal, tore from Cassius's throat. It wasn't the sound of a CEO, it was the sound of a monster unleashed. Cassius intercepted the attacker, moving with a violence that was terrifying to behold. He caught the man's tactical baton mid-swing and snapped the man's arm with a sickening crunch. "Get behind me," Cassius commanded, his voice layered with the alpha command, a sonic frequency that compelled absolute obedience. Julian's body moved before his mind could process it, scrambling behind the sofa. The other 2 mercenaries hesitated only for a second before drawing serrated knives. They clearly hadn't expected the cold CEO to be a combatant. They were wrong. Cassius Thorne hadn't just been sitting in boardrooms. He had been training to suppress his rage, channeling it into lethal martial proficiency. Cassius didn't dodge, he advanced. He took a slash to his forearm, the expensive suit fabric parting to reveal blood, but he didn't even blink. He grabbed the second man by the throat, lifting him off the ground and hurling him into the granite fireplace. The third man lunged for Julian, bypassing Cassius. No, Cassius turned, abandoning his defense. He took a kick to the ribs to reach Julian. He wrapped his arms around Julian, shielding the Omega with his own massive body as the mercenary brought the knife down. The blade sank into Cassius's shoulder. Julian screamed, the sound tearing from his throat. Cassius grunted, his eyes glowing a luminous, feral gold. He didn't fall. Instead, he reached back, ripped the knife out of his own shoulder, and drove it into the attacker's leg, disabling him instantly. The man howled and collapsed. Silence returned to the penthouse, now broken only by the howling wind and Cassius's ragged breathing. Blood, dark and rich, soaked the shoulder of his suit, dripping onto the pristine white rug. "Cassius!" Julian scrambled up, his hands hovering over the wound. "You're bleeding. We need an ambulance." "No police," Cassius wheezed, slumping against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. "My uncle controls the local precinct. If they know I'm wounded, he'll strike the company tonight." "Then let me help you," Julian begged, tearing off the hem of his sweater to make a compress. He pressed it against Cassius's shoulder. For the first time in 3 years, they were touching. Really touching. Julian's hands were stained with Cassius's blood, and Cassius's head rested back against the wall, his eyes half closed, focused entirely on Julian's face. The scent of blood mixed with the pheromones. But instead of fear, Julian felt a strange, magnetic pull. His Omega instincts, long dormant, flared to life. He wasn't frail. He was resilient. And his biology was screaming that this wounded, terrifying man was his. "You're not dying on me," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "Not after I finally got you to talk to me." Cassius chuckled, a dark, wet sound. He reached up with his uninjured arm, his large hand cupping Julian's cheek. His thumb brushed over Julian's bottom lip. "I was a fool," Cassius murmured. "I starved us both because I was afraid of breaking you. But you," he looked at Julian with wonder. "You are not glass, Julian. You are steel wrapped in silk. I told you," Julian said, leaning into the touch, tears spilling over. "I'm not afraid of you. I never was. I was afraid of your indifference." "Never indifference," Cassius swore. His eyes burned with a renewed intensity. "Obsession. Every day, every night." As Julian applied pressure to the wound, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the biological reality of the situation. An alpha was bleeding, his scent was distressed. Julian's omega physiology reacted instinctively to comfort and heal. A sweet, soft scent, like vanilla and rain, began to pour off Julian, filling the room. Cassius's eyes widened. Julian, your scent. Is it too much? Julian asked anxiously. It's the only thing that has ever made sense, Cassius groaned. He leaned forward, burying his face in the crook of Julian's neck, inhaling deeply. The act was intimate, possessive, and incredibly vulnerable. For hours, they sat there amidst the wreckage of their living room. Julian tended to the wound with a first aid kit recovered from the bathroom, stitching the cut with a steady hand he didn't know he possessed. Cassius watched him, his gaze heavy, stripping away the layers of misunderstanding that had separated them. When the bleeding stopped and the storm outside quieted to a drizzle, the dynamic shifted. The danger had passed, but the tension remained, a different kind of tension. Cassius stood up, wincing slightly, and pulled Julian up with him. He didn't let go. He pulled Julian flush against his chest, the ruined suit jacket discarded, his dress shirt unbuttoned and bloodstained. The divorce papers, Cassius said, glancing at the table where the documents lay, now splattered with a drop of crimson. Burn them, Julian whispered. Cassius didn't need to be told twice. He didn't move to the fireplace. Instead, he leaned down and captured Julian's lips. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a reclaiming. It was 3 years of hunger, 3 years of misunderstood protection, 3 years of solitude colliding in a single moment. Cassius kissed him with a desperation that stole Julian's breath, his tongue demanding entry, tasting Julian as if he were the only source of water in a desert. Julian wound his arms around Cassius's neck, pulling him closer, melting into the heat of the alpha. There was no pain, no fragility. There was only the perfect, puzzle piece fit of their bodies. The lie of incompatibility dissolved under the heat of their chemistry. Cassius lifted Julian effortlessly, wrapping Julian's legs around his waist. He carried him past the shattered glass, past the wreckage of the intruders who were groaning in unconsciousness, and toward the master bedroom, the room Julian had never entered. He kicked the door shut, sealing them in darkness. I will not be gentle, Cassius warned, his voice a low growl against Julian's ear as he laid him onto the sprawling bed. I cannot be. Not tonight. Julian looked up at him, tracing the sharp line of Cassius's jaw, the feral glow in his eyes. I don't want gentle, Julian replied, pulling Cassius down. I want my husband. The night that followed was not one of quiet romance. It was a storm. It was the frantic tearing of clothes, the bruising grip of possession, and the frantic, heated friction of skin against skin. It was the claiming bite on the junction of Julian's shoulder, marking him permanently, and the answering scratches down Cassius's back. When the sun rose, filtering through the heavy curtains, the penthouse was silent again. But it was no longer a cold silence. It was the warm, heavy silence of contentment. Julian lay curled against Cassius's chest, the alpha's arm draped possessively over him, holding him fast even in sleep. The divorce papers were forgotten in the other room, destined for the fire. The threat of the uncle remained, a war that would need to be fought tomorrow. But for now, the walls were down. The cold billionaire had not just been touched, he had been thawed. And the Omega who was thought to be glass had proven to be the only vessel strong enough to hold the fire. And that is how the neglected artist tamed the beast who thought himself a monster. If you enjoyed seeing Julian finally take what was his and Cassius losing that icy control, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who ignored you for 3 years, even if he did it to save your life? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 men, BL, YAOI, man 1. Cassius, tall dominant male, raven black hair wet and messy, piercing gold eyes, unbuttoned white dress shirt soaked with blood on shoulder, muscular build, protective and fierce expression, holding man 2. Man 2. Julian, smaller frame, honey blonde hair, wearing cream sweater torn at hem, looking up with intense longing and trust, hands on man 1's chest. Background. is a wrecked luxury penthouse living room, shattered glass from balcony doors, rain falling outside, nighttime, dark moody lighting, dramatic shadows, cinematic composition, sharp focus, intricate details.